Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about resin colorants. This is actually the second video in a series talking about resin and dice making materials. So if you're curious about some of the necessary starting supplies, the basic equipment for dice, make sure you check out the last video. If you just want to hear about common things that are used to color resin though, this should be a standalone video, so feel free to stick around. There are a lot of different things you can use to color resin, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So let's talk about some of the most common colorants, pros and cons of each one, and which one you might want to use for different projects. These are mostly things that I use, so don't take my word as law here either. Feel free to experiment, try some different things, see what works for you. All right, first up, let's talk about a couple of common liquid colorants. Alcohol inks versus resin dyes. So two of the main liquid pigments that people use are alcohol inks and resin dyes. There's some pros and cons to each of them, so let's talk about both and talk about when one might be more appropriate than the other one. First off, how are they similar? Well, both alcohol inks and resin dyes are liquid pigments that usually come in small dropper bottles. Both can be mixed into your resin to get vibrant translucent colors, which means colors that are see-through, and they usually have opaque, or not see-through, white colors. So what's the difference? Well, resin dyes, along with having a wide range of translucent colors, also have more options for opaque colors. I'm not sure I've ever seen any opaque alcohol inks besides white. So if you want to get some opaque colors with alcohol inks, you're gonna have to mix white with your colors, and that makes the colors more pastel. Alcohol inks also tend to discolor more. A lot of purple alcohol inks will burn in resin and discolor to a red or a brown after the resin is cured. I've had a green alcohol ink that was blue in my resin, strangely. You can solve some of the problems that this causes by making sure to make test pieces of all of your colorants before you do large-scale projects, but it can make it annoying when you don't know how what you're buying will turn out. In a similar vein, I've heard that resin dyes tend to have better light fastness, which means that they hold up better when exposed to sunlight over time. They don't fade quite as much as the alcohol inks. I haven't noticed too many issues with my inks, but it is something that I have heard and seen from multiple sources. So all of that said, it might seem like resin dyes are a clear winner, but I still tend to use alcohol inks more. There's just more you can do with them. The dyes are often water-based, which means you don't want to add too much or they might cause curing problems with your resin. So if you want to do a Petri effect or a dirty pour, you can't just drip the colors into the resin and then expect the resin to cure properly. If you want to color the resin, the dyes are all well and good, but dyeing resin is pretty much all they're good for. On the other hand, the alcohol inks are alcohol-based, so you can use a bit more of them before causing cure inhibition. This means you can use the inks directly on the resin for various effects like dirty pours, Petri effects, or swirls of ink. I've made the mistake of trying to do this with dyes, and my resin ended up a goopy, uncured mess. So I would not advise that. So it's useful to have some of each, but if I had to pick one, I'd personally pick alcohol inks just because they allow for a wider variety of techniques. So in short, resin dyes, they have more opaque color options, they keep their color better, and alcohol inks, they have more techniques you can do with them. All right, let's move on to some dry pigments. First up, we have mica powder. Mica powder is a dry pigment that's commonly used to make resin shimmery. Tiny amounts of mica powder will just add a slight sparkle to your resin, while adding more will make the resin opaque and metallic looking. You can get mica powders with different particle sizes. A smaller particle will make it feel more like a smooth metallic shine, while a larger particle size will feel more like a fine sparkling glitter. A lot of micas are a single shimmering color, but there's also types that appear one color and then shimmer another or shimmer multiple colors. These are called interference, multichrome, or chameleon pigments. I'm not 100% sure what the difference is between them, but from what I understand, interference pigments usually appear as a white powder and then when put over a dark base show up as a vibrant color, so they're kind of semi-translucent almost. Whereas multichrome micas are more opaque and metallic and tend to have a couple of colors they shift between all on their own. I've seen chameleon used to describe both of them though. Mica is slightly denser than resin, so it can be used for some interesting techniques. One of my personal favorite resin techniques is what I call a mica drop, where you oversaturate the resin with mica to make it slightly denser, and then it sinks and drips through the other resin. But also, I just like how mica makes the resin shimmery. All right, now what if you want a nice opaque color that's not shimmery? That's where we get Pigment powder. Pigments are non-mica based powdered colorants. They're usually opaque but not shimmery like micas are. There's a lot of regular color options out there, but there's also a lot of powdered pigments that have fun properties as well. For example, you can get glow-in-the-dark pigments that can be mixed into your resin to make your projects glow. These can be a lot of fun, but I've also found that they tend to sink in my resin, so I have to keep that in mind when I'm pouring. There's also temperature-sensitive pigments, also called thermochromatic pigments, that change color at different temperatures. And there's UV reactive or photochromatic pigments that change color when exposed to UV light. I found that powdered pigments often clump up and are a little harder to mix in evenly to resin compared to the mica powders or the liquid colorants. So while I haven't used them much myself, I do want to talk about pigment paste. Pigment pastes are colorants you can buy that are made from powdered pigments that have been mixed with a resin base to turn them into a sticky paste. Hey, editing Liz here. So it's actually been a couple of weeks since I filmed the rest of this video. I have actually tried pigment pastes since then. So if you're wondering why this video is a little bit late coming out, yeah, I went and filmed everything else, realized that I probably should try pigment pastes if I'm gonna be talking about them, and I went and ordered some. Was I looking for an excuse just to get some pigment pastes because I've been wanting to try them? Maybe. So to be honest, I put off getting pigment pastes for a long time because they're kind of spendy. I had pigment powders and dyes, so I never really thought that they were all that necessary. I did get a pretty good amount in the jars that I got, and now that I've tried them out, I am a fan. They mixed into my resin so much easier and smoother than the pigment powders. They're more vibrant, opaque colors than my inks and my dyes, and they added a cool drippy effect like the mica does. I just got a pink, a yellow, and a blue paste because I figured I could mix most colors from those. So I'll leave a link in the description to Eye Candy Pigments, which is where I got them. I really like them. I think that there's definitely some pros to them with how easily they mix into my resin and how vibrant the colors are. I haven't seen any pigment pastes for the glow-in-the-dark pigments or the color-changing ones, but I don't know if they might exist, I'm not sure. But there's lots of options out there for solid opaque colors for sure. Alright, before we finish things up, I feel like we should also talk about unconventional dyes. You can use a lot of different things to color resin. I've tried paint and Kool-Aid and plenty of other random things. As long as it's dried and powdered, it'll probably work. For example, spices can add some cool colors and textures. I use cinnamon quite often as a dark brown pigment. There's so many options out there. Even if it's not dried, like paint, adding a small amount may still work. I've heard of people using different kinds of makeup. I definitely suggest experimenting and trying out some random stuff that you already have to see how it works. All right, let's recap. Some of the most common resin colorants are resin dyes, which do a good job of keeping their color and have a fair number of opaque options. Alcohol inks, which can be used for a lot of different techniques, as well as coloring resin. Mica powders, which are shimmery, add a bit of sparkle to your resin, and also include things like interference and multichrome micas, where they have color shifting properties. Pigment powders, which can make opaque resin, and also include fun things like glow-in-the-dark, thermochromatic, and photochromatic pigments. And pigment pastes, which are pigment powders that have been mixed into a resin base for easier mixing. And you can also use things like spices or paint or makeup or lots of other random things. There's a lot of options out there, and this is mostly just what I use. So don't take my word as law. Experiment, try things for yourself. No matter what you end up using, I would suggest figuring out a way to test all of your colors so that you have a reference to look at, because colors can look very different once they're mixed into resin. I'll show a couple of examples here of my test chips versus just the ink or the dye or the pigment not in resin, and you can see some of the vast differences between them. If you have any more ideas for things to color resin, please leave them in the comments below. I'd love to get some ideas. I'd love to hear what your favorite resin colorants are. I've also realized that I could probably do a full video over pretty much anything in this 3-part video series. So if there's a particular topic that I've gone over that you would like to learn more about, or you'd like to see a whole video about, let me know in the comment as well. As mentioned at the beginning, this is the second part in a 3-part video series talking about resin and dice making materials. The first video was about basic supplies, and the next one will be about resin inclusions whenever I still have to film that one. So make sure you stick around for that one because there's a lot of fun things you can add to resin. As always, I want to go ahead and thank my wonderful patrons. I'll put their names on the screen here. I actually recently set up a schedule for myself to make weekly posts on Patreon. So if you've ever been interested in joining or want to check it out, now's a good time. I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Hope I'll see you in the next one. Bye. There's a cat on the seat behind me. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat. Should I show you the cat? Can you see the cat? Hello. Hello. Bye.